So thanks for giving up your Sunday afternoon to do this interview for our upcoming session. Can I first, I guess, just briefly ask you if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves to the recording, and we'll move on from there.
Who do you want to
Tash,
go?
would you like to go first, or?
Sure. So I'm Tash. I am one of the educators with Camden Family Daycare through the Camden Council. And yeah, I've been in the industry for about 16 years, working in centres, schools, and now family daycare as well.
Fantastic. And Alison.
Yeah, same scheme as Tash, and I've been an educator for about 21 years with the same scheme. Um, yeah, that's my story.
The first thing I'd like to ask you today is how do the outdoor spaces in your services make you and your children feel? So beyond the activities, what's actually the feelings and the sensations that they get out of those outdoor physical spaces?
Um, I think when we go outside and when we're engaged with our well, my environment, the first feeling is just regulation because in the mornings especially, I can have children arriving anywhere from 7 a.m.
Yep.
So when the bulk of the children arrive between 8 and 8:30, it can get really like full on and everyone's not very regulated at times. So we've been going outside. We've been outside by 8:15 some days to just and as soon as we step out, it's like a calming feeling comes over all of us, including myself, because an unregulated adult cannot regulate children. So when it's all happening, like the outside environment really does help regulate all the emotions.
I love that we've touched on regulation already, Alison. That's an awesome contribution. So thank you very much for that. And Tash, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I definitely echo what Alison was saying. When we take out the kids in the morning, um, it's immediately calming. You might have had
Mm.
a really um, crazy drop off where everyone's come at once and it's like, okay, everyone's got to sort of adjust. Or, you might have had a slow morning or whatever your morning looks like. The moment that you step out and they're just immersed in nature, it's really grounding. It's really just that calming effect is instant. And you sort of just want to soak it all up. And, my service, we've got predominantly boys and they just always want to be outside.
Yep.
But we've got to come back in, whether it's rest time or toileting or things like that. They just immediately want to go back outside.
No, I like that we've kicked off with this actually because a lot of the feedback we had leading in was that people actually found going outside can be sometimes, not always, but fall into the too hard basket. But I like that immediately you sort of flip that to being like, well, actually, it could actually be the thing that does away with things being too hard. And that's a bit of a mantra we're working on a lot at the moment is this idea of regulation before education or regulation before structure. And across the board too, from family daycares to long daycares and right into schools. It's a real paradigm shift for people, but it's getting across that notion that well, you can have an hour and a half in a classroom or an educational setting that could be a struggle, or you could have 45 minutes of regulated productive time and the rest of it outside. I mean, what would you prefer to do? Time in class is not necessarily the thing that equals learning. It's productivity and being regulated while you're there. So no, that's awesome. I'm glad that you've acknowledged so clearly for everybody listening that the outdoors has an incredible capacity to do that without explicit probably instruction. It's a very innate thing.
That's
Um,
Angus,
yeah,
that's really right with also I guess to the point of an outdoor environment doesn't automatically assume like um nature as in it could just be your grass grounding you,
mhm,
the air, the wind. So it doesn't have to be, and I think when you touched on some educators put it in the too hard basket,
mhm.
the outdoor environment doesn't have to be a convoluted, massive scaled thing. It can literally be grass, some cardboard boxes, some loose parts, and let them go. All open-ended, and the structure comes from the children then working with the resources.
Yeah, I like that sentiment as well. And Alison, I'm a huge fan of loose parts, so I'm glad you've given them a mention. And they'll feature in my in the presentation that will precede this. But as an educator, I actually love the days where it's not convoluted, but the children end up doing something that I could simply not have planned for. They're the
Yeah.
days I sit back and it's just so satisfying. But you have to be real with yourself there and realize, well, if I couldn't have planned for that, then no lesson I was ever going to do, or even provocation of the loose parts could have achieved that. It just had to be authentic and
Yeah.
holistic like that, which is letting go a bit. Is that fair to say? And just
Yeah.
appreciate what comes from that.
Yeah.
I think this will be an easy segue, to be honest with you, to the next question. But you know, the question was,
Yeah.
do you see the outdoor spaces just as important as your indoor spaces? And I think we're leading the way here to say that that's probably going to be the case. But would you like to elaborate on that idea? Because once again, we see, and we can all picture this, right? We can see an over curation of indoor spaces, the sections and the resourcing and the intention that we can't always see. But there's an over curation of the indoor spaces and not so much the outdoor spaces sometimes. But and maybe we don't have to, Alison, over curate the outdoor spaces as we've already touched on. But is it safe to say that you'd both then see, though, the outdoor space as equally important to the indoor?
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
I'd say either equally or even more important because, these days kids get picked up from daycare, from school, and a lot of them, they just go home and there's, sort of inside again when they've been inside for majority of the day, especially if they are at school. And so getting outside and spending that time outdoors, I would say it's more important because of those mental health benefits and those physical health benefits. Any learning can be taken outdoors, and just having that mentality can really change a lot. So
Fantastic.
yeah, I actually feel like it's probably more important, probably more on that end.
And
Yeah.
Alison?
I think as Tash touched on the emotional, and as parents are very busy, they pick up, they go home, dinner, routine, bed. But something I had jotted down was about I would class being outdoors as more important, and only because when children are outdoors, so when you're inside, it's very regulated. There's no, you've maintained a temperature, you've got your aircon on, everything's maintained. But as soon as the children walk outside, they're experimenting with different weather conditions. They're having to be resilient and resourceful with their resources, i.e., if they're building with blocks on the grass isn't a stable foundation, so it may fall over. So when it falls over, what do they try and do? They go, okay, what do I do now? Or the wind may blow it over, or it might start raining and things might start getting wet. So all of these things help to build resilience and capability in the children, which you're not going to get indoors.
No, I love that a lot. And to elaborate on that too, like sorry, just had a little momentary glitch there on my screen. The idea of more important is an interesting one, and the session that preceded the interview talks a lot about play work, because play work is the practice and the way of working with children, which I follow. But one way in which play work is often defined in its foundation forms is as a compensatory practice. And how I interpret that is, I don't necessarily value the indoor over the outdoor for children's play, because children will play wherever there's children. However, as a compensatory practice, if we do know that children are going home to be very indoor, very sedentary, very away from other children, that makes, therefore, from that play work perspective, my compensation to offer these children this, enriching childhood that we want to do, that would obviously therefore tilt towards outdoor play as the thing that I want to offer them. And let's face it, I mean, I know this is such a cliche thing to say, but I grew up on the street, on my BMX, at the park, at the creek, and so on and so forth. It's really easy to take that for granted when we know that's just not the case for so many of these kids now. So compensation side again comes in there. Like, what can we do? We can't necessarily offer them that, but what's something else that we could bottle and offer that gives them the same feelings, the same sensations? And we are talking about feelings here in the outdoor environment. So I thought that was a relevant segue as well. The next question is an interesting one, because this is where I think, and this is from feedback that I've had from a lot of educators, this is where the too hard basket situation can come into it, because the idea of opening the door and letting the children out doesn't sound hard, does it? I mean, that seems very, very straightforward to me. But how in your services do you take that idea, and Alison, particularly that idea of not overthinking it, because that's where people struggle a little bit, I think, and tying those ideas to the relevant frameworks in your service as far as documentation and quip links and all those things that everyone loves, don't we know it? But how do you achieve that? Because I think in that is the thing that makes people nervous with the whole, I think you just let them do it. Because it doesn't seem like it's planned, but obviously we can be more intentional with that idea.
Yeah, do you want, yeah, well, I'll go first.
Yeah,
Well,
please.
in regards to that question, my main thing that came to me was it doesn't have to be hard. Like when you say, but see, again, I guess for educators, all our environments look different. So sometimes opening the door might be, okay, so all the kids have to be outside at the same time because I can't supervise people outside going to the toilet. So everyone has to move in a group, possibly to go to the toilet. I'm lucky that I have a very open play space. So, and I've got windows so I can see pretty much if I'm changing a nappy, I can still see outside. So I am lucky in that respect. But in regards to the question with the approved frameworks, I think well, children's assessment of learning looks so different for all our services. So children should be involved in their own assessment of learning. And the photos play a big part. Like I have a book that's children's voices and contributions. So in this, the children put all their work and then they can go back to that and they can analyze their play spaces and go, and then they look at it and go, well, let's rebuild that or let's go back and do that. So they have complete ownership of their learning in all play spaces, but we're focusing on outdoors. So that's one big thing. ELF and QS are the foundations, but giving the children their own voices and contributions is so important.
And that does link beautifully to the framework. So thank you, Alison, because I think, that the word agency gets thrown around a lot, but really understanding what that word means, I think is crucial to being able to make these links and really justify that if they take it a different direction.
Doesn't matter.
I'm not worried. In fact, fantastic.
We're all high-fiving each other when, like, a child decides to do something different and you see this wow moment go off in their head. And I was always taught, like, by a lady I used to work with to be purposeful, intentional, meaningful. And for every educator that wants to set up a play space, just remember those 3 words, because if it's not purposeful, if it's not intentional and it's not meaningful, why are you doing it?
So, couldn't agree with you more, Alison. That's a fantastic way to summarize that. That should be, maybe that's the new framework we need to be working on.
Purposeful, intentional, and meaningful. But when you break it down to those 3 words, how easy is it? And just the wow moments, they all link in with each other.
Being good with language is important, I've found too, because really understanding what those words mean. And intentional is a huge one for me with loose parts, for example, because we actually, as an educator, can have an opportunity to define what the intent is. And I see people get put on the spot with loose parts a lot because I mentor in this space a little bit, but the intention can be that they're nothing. That is the intention, because then if they're nothing, the children can take them in any direction. And that's my intention. But people can, it can trip people up because it clearly sounds like a question that says, well, what's it going to be? What's the plan? What's the outcome? And sort of unraveling that outcomes focused way of thinking to, once again, the intention. That can be a very good little bit of dialogue to have up your sleeve, because no one likes being put on the spot with these questions.
No, but it's so open-ended too, because loose parts isn't just, I think 10 years ago, we all thought about loose parts as being small beads, screws, like little things in a tinker tray, whereas now they're open-ended experiences, boxes, wood. Pine cones, like anything that is open-ended, it doesn't have a definitive meaning of how to be used, is a loose part.
100%. Look, the larger stuff too, as you said, the smaller objects that used to be there. And look, if you still go to Pinterest and so on and so forth these days, that will be the dominant loose parts you'll see. Simon Nicholson, who wrote the theory, though, first and foremost states that loose parts should be space forming. So children should be able to create those nooks and crannies and caves and dens first, before the smaller parts get transported in and the really magical play happens. So that really sort of breaks apart that idea of little trays and little bits. Not to say those things aren't important, because they can contribute to the really imaginative play that comes next. But that space forming capacity is really powerful. And children in all cultures and in all continents do that same thing. And once you can beautifully generalize something like that, it becomes even more powerful, because clearly that's something we should be offering children. If this is the thing children do wherever children are, if they have the time, space, and resources. Small tangent there, I apologize. But Tash, did you want to talk to the frameworks and the NQS as well, in regards to how you do make this open-ended outdoor experience linked to this?
Yeah, I guess you got two parts. You got your activities that you're providing, and then, you're governed by NQS and the EYLF. And so obviously you have this big area of safety. And, when you're talking about outdoor play and risky play, even the loose parts play, you can find sometimes educators are really hesitant of unlocking all of that and actually really delving deep into it. And, you know, I think if you really set the foundation with your children, slowly introduce things, you can open up incredible doors where you see different levels of learning that you haven't seen before. And so that's something that is really big here. My backyard that we have here for the kids, it's actually quite small. And so, when I first opened, I was like, okay, what am I going to do with this space? I ended up just getting the kids to design it with me. And at the time, we were going out doing lots of nature walks. And, I just found having them involved in that process of designing the space and what they wanted in there, just based on what we were already doing out in the community, it really empowered them. And, we've got like I still have babies here as well, and we still have all the rocks and the pebbles and the logs and all of that stuff is all outside, and we have the loose parts. But coming back to I guess more the NQS, where you're talking about safety and that, you can still provide those opportunities. And it's supervised. You're there with them, you're educating them on how to use these things as well. So still going off on the loose part tangent, because I loved that was brought up, because that's something I'm really, really big on.
It's not too much of a tangent, because the session preceding the interview will speak to loose parts very specifically. So it might actually be quite a great segue.
Yeah.
And you mentioned risk, and I think risk for me is another one of those things that can make that too hard basket, just to use that term again. And there's a great Playwork mantra around that, which is effectively that we do provide children with managed risks to keep them safe. And it sounds like a very throwaway comment, but if children have no experience with being able to identify, engage with, and obviously at an age-appropriate supported level, of course, but if they've never had these experiences and all of a sudden they're meant to be young adults who can tackle and manage all this stuff for themselves, having been denied it since early years and onwards, it's a fallacy. So it's really on us in that, once again, that compensatory sense, to at least expose them to stuff that they can identify, work with, make decisions about, and we can scaffold the support around that. Now, just in the event that we don't want to go too much over time, isn't 15 minutes such a tiny amount of time to have a conversation like this? But I did want to ask in relation to the NQS and the frameworks specifically. And Alison, you've shown us a great example already with your book. I really appreciated seeing that. But there are other ways that you document this, specifically your outdoor play. Are there any innovative, different ways that you can do that really shows that intention, purposefulness, meaningfulness?
Well, again, taking it back to the children's lead. So within NQS, obviously we have risk management and things like that. Well, the children in my service, they did the risk management for the loose parts. So the wood, the wood, the tools, that area, we sat down and we worked out what we needed to keep us safe. So the children came up with the shoes. They needed enclosed shoes on, because in my environment, they don't have to wear shoes, but in the construction area, they need shoes on. Someone came up with, we only pick one piece of wood up at a time. So they molded the risk assessment for that area as we did that as a group. And we also did that as a group for our worm farm. So that, going back to NQS and ELF, that's including the children, but staying within the rules and regulations that we have with risk management. So instead of me just going, okay, guys, you need this, this, and this, you can only do it this, this, and this way, they contributed it. And by them contributing to that, they now have ownership.
Yeah, I like any risk benefit and risk assessment done like that, Alison, because I like to think that if we do manage it all ourselves, well, what happens when we're not there? Whereas
Yeah.
when they're involved in the risk taking, remove the adult, and they still might think,
But they're
oh,
also,
actually, I need to do stuff here.
yeah,
Yeah,
but you hear their conversations of, oh, you need to put your shoes on. You don't have your shoes on. You
yeah,
can't pick the wood up.
yeah,
Or don't pick the wood up like that. We have to pick it up. Like we have to be safe. So
yeah.
as soon as you hear those conversations within the children, you know that it's actually been because they've created the document, they've
Mm.
absorbed the information.
Well, to use assessment and rating language, it's obviously embedded when you start hearing
Yes.
that from the children. But we do talk a lot about rules, and when children co-create structures, it just becomes culture. And that's what you want in that culture is that such embedded innate understanding of it that it's not the piece of laminated plastic on the wall that you have to refer to. It's just the thing you do. And then
Just
they
there.
remind each other, as you say, they remind each other of that
Yes.
culture, which is a really great thing.
Yeah.
What about you, Tash? Any key documentation styles you love in this space?
Yeah, so quite similar to Alison, we do a floor book as well. We do a lot of project learning. So my program's a little different in the sense that every day is a fresh page. It's a blank page. And so once children all arrive in the morning, we actually have a session called our Talk About the Day. And so the children actually write the program for the day and they choose what they want to do, what they want to get out of it, what they want to research or investigate, any particular activities they want to do. And then it's my job to step back and then facilitate those, those learning opportunities and what they're going to get out of it. So yeah, the children write the program and then each week they might add to that floor book as well, just showcasing what they've learnt, what they've discovered, what they've researched or investigated. Yeah, any photos they want to add, drawings they want to add.
Yeah,
And that is our program. Yeah, we just
fantastic.
yeah, and as Alison also mentioned, if a child's really engrossed in something and they're, showing all these new skills they haven't done before or really learnt something that's quite huge for them, rather than going away and doing your observation and then programming for the next week or the next month, we extend on that on the spot. And it's still documented. We, still do our observations, things like that. But yeah, I'm quite same as Alison. I'm really big on doing things in the moment and just making it really purposeful rather
Well,
than,
that's how play works, doesn't
yeah, that's right.
it?
They might come next week and they're like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you've gone to all this, trouble programming and writing and
Yeah,
yeah.
and that for me is fundamental to play work. When we get to outcomes focused, it can create a bit of a disjunction between the adult and the child relationship because the adult's now fixated on wanting to see that thing, and a week
Mhm.
later that might not be that kid's thing at
Yeah,
all.
that's right.
So that's a really great point. Look, guys, we've gone a little bit over, which is okay. So just to finish up, I wanted to ask you because this is something we can address in either the footnotes or the session itself. But if you could give me the biggest barrier, and I know we've definitely innately just touched on some anyway as we've gone, but the biggest barrier you think is out there to educators getting outside more and embracing and really harnessing that space? What do you think the biggest barrier would be?
I think this is something that Alice and I chatted about the other day. I think weather can often be the
Yeah,
biggest barrier for some educators. And um, I'm really big on all weather play. If it's, a 35 plus degree day, obviously it's way too hot. Um, and so if you don't have that shelter or there's not that breeze to sort of, help cool it down, then it's probably going to be too hot to go outside. But in saying that, if it's raining, you can always get gumboots, raincoats. I've always provided that for the children here. We've got gumboots, raincoats, and even the wet weather overalls.
yeah,
You can get them online, Kmart, Target. They sell all of this as well. Or you can even get families involved and get them to bring them in and just leave them at your service. But honestly, that the rainy days, my kids cannot wait to get out there and to have their raincoats on. Even on Friday, we've been project learning lots of bugs and insects. So we've been finding a lot of them in the garden and in our bush tucker garden, we've got lots of caterpillars and that at the moment. And so outside we have this big trough kind of going and they added their large river rocks, they clipped off some of the plants and the fruits and the berries and all of that, and they popped it in and made a little habitat. But then it started raining, and so they looked up and they're like, and one of the kids said, "Oh, it's just water. It's just water. We can give the bugs some water." So, they went and got their raincoats. They already had their gumboots on. And, we just continued up until like lunchtime. And so that was probably about 10 o'clock. And they actually stayed at this activity for almost 2 hours, and had their raincoats on. They were more than happy.
It's a carbon copy thing I hear,
Yeah.
educators identifying longer periods of time engaged in outdoor settings as opposed to indoor settings. That's not empirical evidence. This is just hearsay from what I do get told by educators, but I think it's worth sharing because there's got to be something in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, having those extended periods and it's uninterrupted and you're just really going with their lead is so valuable, because I feel like it just unlocks this other part of the brain where they're just going deeper and deeper and deeper into their thoughts, into their curiosities. And yeah, if you're out there for 15 minutes and it starts raining, like, oh, got to pack up, got to come in, then that's all interrupted. And you can't actually take advantage of that moment.
Yep.
And that water from the rain turned into, a bit science experiment as well. We ended up getting all different things to add in. And then at the end, we also had, your bicarb and your vinegar and bubbling all the insects and watching them sort of, which they loved, mixing with the water and having all of that, sensory output as well.
No worries. And Alison, biggest challenge you think?
Yeah, as Tash said, like we had a bit of a talk. Like I've got to say, when I actually thought about this question, I think one is fear. I think one is fear to set up an environment that may cause an incident, may cause an accident. Like we can't control everything. We can only risk manage what we can and know. So what I had written down was like, we've got, raincoats. Like, don't be scared to ask your parents. Just on enrollment, I say to my parents, bring your raincoat. I need a raincoat and a pair of gumboots that stays in a wet weather box, that stays in care. But also sometimes raincoats are quite inhibitive. I know that when I wear a raincoat, I feel a bit closed in. So I always give the children the choice. If you want to put a raincoat on, you can. If you don't, that's okay. When you want to finish playing, we can get changed.
Yep.
So that then, as soon as you say to a child, you must have a raincoat on, they go, I don't want to wear a raincoat, so I'm not going to go and do it. So they're then therefore possibly missing out on a opportunity to be out in the rain, as long as it's not torrential and hailing and crazy town outside.
Of course.
But if it's just like a light rain or even, medium to heavy, they're only getting wet. So it's no different to them using water play in a sensory aspect.
Children don't melt.
No, and I'm a big one for not forcing like paint shirts on. We do not use paint shirts. They paint in their clothes, because as soon as you say stop, we need to put a paint shirt on, as Tash said, the moment's gone.
Yeah.
So for that child to stay in the moment, like they've got to play-based learning, which is something that we all need to be like. That's where children learn. That's, as you've said, that is the focus of where children learn. They cement their skills, they learn their skills, they impart their skills to their peers. It just needs to have a flow. And if educators can get that flow right from indoor to out, outdoor to in, that's where the magic is. That's where it happens.
Fantastic. And flow is a great thing to research anyway. Ladies, I appreciate your time. I'm going to have to be a timekeeper, which I hate because discussions can be so rich. But we have gone over, which is fine. But I really do appreciate your time on a Sunday. I look forward to putting all this together and for it to be part of the session coming up in a couple of weeks' time. But once again, thank you very much. It sounds like your program's amazing, by the way.
Thanks, Angus. Appreciate it. Thanks, Tash.
Thanks so much for having us. And
All right.